Hi, Kylie. I want to just leave you some feedback on SE2. I think you have some good sections in this paper, and I think that the thesis that you chose is a good one. There's a little bit of tweaking to do in the thesis to make it grammatically sound. You've got some errors and parallelism here. So let me see if I can illustrate this for you. Education is something that is very uncomfortable and can test people in different ways. But if we choose to be mindful of what we are learning, stay motivated, and then this is where it changes, challenges, and want to see growth, then the knowledge of education will come along. So, whenever you have items on a list, you want to make sure that all of those or words on a list, you want to make sure that all those words are the same word type. And the reason why this sounds a little awkward in here is because you started with a list of verbs. If we choose to be is a verb, mindful, stay motivated is a verb, and then challenges is a noun. So what you want to do is make sure that every section on your comma list here all has a verb. So right here is where you want to do some tweaking to make your thesis clear. If you do that, your thesis will be far more clear. Um, I'm a little. I'm not quite sure what to make of the opening line. I don't understand what education is a learning strategy and a learning concept. I think you need more development there, because I would argue that education is not a strategy, but rather a process. Um, and a concept usually refers to uh, I guess education could be a concept, but I'm lost on what you mean by strategy there. So the introduction, these opening lines, kind of threw me for a loop, but it took off. It took off at this point, right? So to me, introductions are really difficult. It's hard to get going sometimes, and I think that you really started going at this moment, right? So maybe it's not so much these ideas that you start with. Maybe it's you're starting with the idea that we put so much emphasis on compulsory schooling in America, and maybe identifying how we do that or why we do that, and then pivoting into the idea that not everyone needs to go to school in order to be educated. And then you can then take off with your thesis from there. So maybe presenting a moment of contrast, right? I think that that might help your introduction, because it's these first three sentences where I feel a little lost as your reader. I like this idea of mindfulness, or being mindful, but I think you need to nail this down a little bit more clearly, because mindful learning makes me think of like mindful meditation. So I wish that you uh define this more clearly. So you say it's acknowledging what you're learning, and then you bring in a quote from Gust, but I still can't fully follow what you mean by mindful, because I would assume that being mindful is something that's positive, but then in your example here you give it's a negative example, right? So we typically think of someone's a cheater, whether or not they pass the class. um we still think that that's not a good thing, right? So if you cheated and passed a test, you might brag about it to your friends, but you shouldn't. You certainly wouldn't like brag about it to the teacher or brag about it to your parents, right? It's something that you would kind of keep to yourself. So I think maybe defining this and more clearly identifying what this is. I really like the idea, and I like the quote that you bring in from Gus, but I think this might need some more development. Also, be certain to not just cherry pick evidence. So remember, when you bring in a source, you need to state the author's full name, the article title, and then also objectively capture the overall main idea. You need to do that first before you start bringing in the minor points, like this direct quotation. So this would be considered cherry picking evidence, which means that all you're doing is pulling like one minor part of the article in order to suit your purposes. Now, you absolutely can use this quotation, but before you do that, you have to make sure that you remain true to the author's original intent. And you do that by creating that signal phrase and summary. Like like we practiced in the first paper. It looks like you have a typo here. You want to say fictitious example. Um, and I feel like I like that you went ahead and brought this in, but I feel like this needs more introduction, right? Because it kind of feels like, even though I know what you're doing, right? Because I wrote that prompt, in terms of the paper, it kind of comes out of nowhere. So I would just maybe say, as discussed in class, or we explored fictitious examples in class, and one specific example was this one, and then here's what I'm doing with it, right? So it just needs a little bit more of an introduction. Um, yeah, and I like your ideas on motivation. And that I think that this has a stronger introduction into the paper than your other one did. Be certain to think about how you're transitioning between paragraphs. So try to see how you can take the idea of motivation into to help you transition into the idea of challenges as well. I really like the personal example that you provide. I just wish that you um, I wish that you got a little bit more specific, especially because this paragraph is about challenges. So you talk about the idea of studying really hard, and these are all good points, but they're still a little broad. So to really make this narrow and specific, like, all students have had to study really hard before, but what is it about this specific course that was so challenging? So really paint the picture for the reader in that moment where you're studying. Is it the idea that the concepts were really difficult? Is it the idea that you had to study harder than you ever did before? Right? Just be more specific here. Um, and again, like, at this moment, this I like this paragraph about growth, but it feels there's not a clear transition here. So you want to take the ideas of challenges and see how you can connect it to the idea of growth. um so I think that there's some good moments here, but there are some areas where you need to do some revision. And I think if you clarified some of these vague ideas, uh, and brought in those signal phrases and summaries, and then thought about your transitions, I think that this will be a stronger paper. Oh, this was the other thing that I want to talk to you about. You want to hyphenate day to day and basis. You have a homophone error here, so you actually want this to be BASIS. Bases would be like like baseball bases, right? Like, you run the bases. Um, but you want the other kind, BASIS. All right, Kylie, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.